Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Better Together podcast, where we explore what it really takes to build something meaningful and the unexpected paths that get us there. I'm your host for today, Shawn Sundsvold, and I'm joined by my partner in business and in life, Kelly Sundsvold. Today's guest is Alex Ward, the founder of Automate My Co., a consultancy helping small businesses streamline their operations through smart automation and AI-powered workflows. His work is all about reclaiming time, reducing overwhelm, and building systems that actually work, especially for entrepreneurs who are wearing all the hats. But Alex didn't start out in tech. In fact, the road to automation and entrepreneurship began on two wheels. When Alex was fresh out of college with a marketing degree, he found himself delivering meals for a small St. Louis-based bike courier service called Food Peddler. He loved cycling and enjoyed the work, but more than that, he became fascinated by the behind-the-scenes operations. When the opportunity came to buy the business, he took it. And running Food Peddler quickly became a crash course in what works and what absolutely doesn't when you're trying to scale a local service business without burning out. The hands-on experience is what ultimately led him to automation, first as a necessity, then as a passion, and now as a business. Today, through Automate My Co., Alex helps other small business owners build systems that support growth, not chaos. His story is about more than just efficiency. It's about following the spark of curiosity and turning it into something scalable, sustainable, and deeply useful. Alex, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here.
Well, thank you, Shawn and Kelly. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
Awesome. Well, let's just dive right in at the beginning and what led you to Food Peddler and eventually to Automate My Co.
Yes. Well, so I graduated with a marketing degree from Truman State University, and my first, I'd say, big leap into my career was an internship at Fleischman Hillard, a PR agency in downtown St. Louis. And it was a 5-month internship. And at the bottom of the building was a restaurant called Pickles Deli that Food Peddler partnered with. And so I'd see in Food Peddler, as you said in the intro, we are a local bike-powered restaurant delivery service. And I would see the food peddlers coming in and out and picking up food, and I'd see them on the street sometimes. And so I knew that my internship was coming to an end. So I picked up a card at Pickles and I looked it up. My plan was really just to find something fun to do for a couple months over the summer while I kind of decompressed, but also looked for another full-time job. So I applied and I started pedaling. And at the same time, I was doing some freelance PR work. And long story short, about a year later, I actually left Food Peddler, but I ended up running into the founder, Tim, just kind of out and about. And he was telling me that he was looking for somebody to take over the downtown market. So he had an idea of sort of a franchise model. It was effectively a franchise model where you'd have local ownership for each market, and then you would share in the software and some of the marketing. So I said yes, I took the leap, and I ran that for basically January of 2019 through the summer. And little by little, I was having conversations with Tim about how things were going, and his passions, it was pretty clear, his passions were allied with his new business that he had started with his wife. And so in about July 2019, he approached me about buying the rest of Food Peddler outright. And I said yes. I had always felt like I wanted to own a business. I wasn't really sure what exactly that would look like. But since that opportunity presented itself, I wanted to take the leap.
Yeah, that's like, I'm just imagining, like, we lived for a very brief stint in St. Louis, and I can just imagine what it's like riding a bike around there.
Yeah.
It's busy, and the roads are old.
Yeah.
So I remember when we moved there, one of the things that they said was, if you get off the freeway, it's not a guarantee that you'll get back on. So, on the same freeway, at least.
The same freeway.
Yes. Yeah. It was, I don't know, it was just very different coming from Texas into St. Louis. It was just a very different approach. But
Yeah.
I love this model of like delivering the food through peddling. So when the founder approached you about buying the business, and I know this was kind of like, it just sounded like it just kind of happened naturally. What made you say yes, other than just wanting to, own your own business? Was it instinct, strategy? Or was it just the right opportunity?
I would say a little bit of all of those. I I'm definitely a kind of a detail-oriented guy, and there were a bunch of things that I felt like he should be doing to improve the business. And and at the same time, I felt like the separate ownership model just wasn't working. So, for example, he wanted to have his own team of peddlers and have that all be separated. So we were two different LLCs, but he wanted to have that team separated, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. It's a matter of a couple miles apart where the markets were, so Central West End and downtown. So I'm sure you're familiar with those areas.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so there came points where, I would be without coverage in downtown. I'd just say like, hey, can somebody from Central West End cover? And he'd just kind of say like, no, you need to find your own peddlers. So yeah, so that really did not make sense. I think that, yeah, the idea that we couldn't pool all of our resources together definitely was holding me back a little bit. And also, like I said, his passion started to transition to his new company with his wife, and so he just wasn't giving it much energy. He wasn't putting much energy into Food Peddler. So I definitely took the opportunity just because I knew that I could grow it better than he was, and I knew that it was working. It was a working cash positive business that yeah, the opportunity was right in front of me, so that's why I went for it.
That's awesome. And it's we've talked to a lot of people on our show that it's sort of like the accidental CEO, right? That it sort of just fell into entrepreneurship. And I think there's the idea that it gets kind of romanticized, like being an entrepreneur is an amazing thing. And it is. I love it. I would never go back to not being one. But when you become an entrepreneur, you realize there's some unsexy and unfun lessons you have to learn.
Yes.
When you take over a business. So what were some of those when you took over Food Peddler?
Yeah, well, so at the time, the downtown market was only doing weekday lunches, Monday through Friday. I think we were doing 11 to 3, which, it's, wasn't too big of a time commitment, but 20 hours a week. But then when I took over Central West End, then it became 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, every day. So we were doing 11 to 3 and 5 to 9. And so, jumping into that, having so much more of my time taken up by this business, my social life definitely took the hit. Same with my mental health a little bit, just because it always fell on me to make sure that orders were placed. The dispatching system that we had at the time, we still use an app called Telegram, messaging app. And we have a chat bot that'll send, so basically a confirmation email from our software provider would be sent, and then that email information would be parsed, and that would create a notification in Telegram that everybody sees. So that's one notification. And then the peddler who is in charge of taking that order would message the same group, or at the time, it was a different group. There were two different groups, one for each market. There were 2 orders groups for each market, and then 2 air traffic control groups for each market. So that was 4 groups, all of which were sending notifications all the time. And so, I'm very much in support of limiting the number of notifications that we get. It's just so distracting and can fragment our attention, which ultimately, like little by little, will really grind on your mental well-being over time. So yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So yeah, all in all, just the much bigger time commitment and also the strain on my own personal life.
Yeah, it's interesting as we've had these conversations and we talk with other business owners, mental health seems to be a theme that's weaved throughout.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. And I'm really thankful that we're talking about the mental health aspect of it as well. All right. So let's talk about how you got into automation. Like you mentioned, automation didn't quite start as a service. It kind of became a survival tactic.
Yes.
What was the system or automation that you built to make you think, wait, this could help other people too?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. It really happened over the course of several years. So let me think. I'd say the starting point. Well, so first of all, with Food Peddler, I inherited a few different systems that Tim had set up. So one was Mail Parser, which, as I mentioned before, we would receive those confirmation emails, and then that information would get parsed into that notification. So that's a really small example of an automation. Because Mail Parser was sending a direct, it's called a webhook, to Telegram's API to send that notification to us. And in early 2021, I think I just came across this ad for a marketing agency that focuses on restaurants, and they focus on social media chatbots. So the basic idea that they had this free ebook that I read through. It was a lead magnet, of course, to try to get some business for them. But I looked through this, and it was basically talking about a strategy for creating new leads for a restaurant. And we're very close to a restaurant. We're adjacent. So it kind of laid out this strategy of having a chatbot on Facebook that can chat with your potential leads and then ultimately have them order. I started playing around with ManyChat, which is a chatbot service, social media chatbot service, and I wanted a way for the chatbot to interact with real-time order data. So if somebody ordered, I wanted it to be able to log that conversion and then also tell that person in that same channel. So Facebook Messenger, for example, like, thank you for ordering. Because I felt like it was the best user experience to keep everyone in their own channel where they discovered us. And so I started trying out Zapier. And Zapier was mentioned a couple times in that ebook. And Tim, the Food Peddler founder, had also mentioned it to me a couple times. He had a Zap, which for anybody listening is just a workflow, an automation workflow. So he had created a single Zap, which was still running for me, where anytime somebody new ordered, then I would go in to our Gmail and I would star that confirmation email for that order. And then the next morning, it would send an automatic email to that person as a thank you. So, so as I said, I started with that ManyChat. Started playing around with ManyChat and then connecting that to our orders. And in order to do that, I started logging our orders in a Google Sheet. So every time we got a new order, it would log that in a Google Sheet. And then from there, over the course of 4.5 years or so, that's transitioned into a Zapier table where I have a separate table for all orders and then a separate table that aggregates all of our customers' data. And then Zapier tables, if you're familiar with Airtable, it's basically the same system. And yeah, so I'd say that the ManyChat bots were the first thing I played around with. It wasn't super effective, but it was a great learning experience. It was great education for myself to learn how to set up just some basic automation.
That's awesome. And I think it's interesting as entrepreneurs, like a lot of the ones I've met, they're kind of tinkerers, right? In one way or another. We look at systems, right? Like what's working, what's not. And just hearing you kind of dive into your own systems, and learn like, how do I make this work for myself?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think most small business owners get wrong about automation and creating that for themselves?
Yeah, I would say that what they get wrong is doing a lot of the manual work themselves. So there's so many things, as I've learned, it would take a long time for me to go through every little thing that I've set up for myself. But there's so many manual processes that you can automate using something like Zapier. So Zapier is able to connect, it's up to 8,000 different apps right now. So just with that example of any time that you star an email in Gmail, then it sends a thank you email the next morning. That's just connecting. Well, it is connecting a Gmail trigger to another Gmail trigger, but you can connect it to, or not a trigger, a Gmail action. But you can connect that to so many different apps. So yeah, I would say if you're a small business owner, just take some time and really think through all the processes that you're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis, and either reach out to somebody like me or start playing around on your own. ChatGPT could be very helpful for you for learning some of this stuff as well.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of shifting to, we've talked a lot about Food Peddler. Let's shift a little bit to your current company, the Automate My Co.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about that. How are you using this company to help other small businesses improve their automation and processes?
Yes. So I got my first client, backing up a little bit. Of course, since I was sort of client zero running Food Peddler, I was figuring out all this stuff for myself. I, of course, realized this is an incredibly valuable service for a lot of that could be valuable for a lot of companies. And, if I was really struggling myself with so much workload and so many manual processes that I was starting to not enjoy doing, but could automate, then I certainly saw the potential to help other companies. So yeah, it was sort of a soft launch back in October of 2023. I started working with my first client. It might have been, I think it was a little bit earlier. It might have been August, and then my second client was October 2023. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but the first thing I set up was for a fitness apparel company, and he wanted to take some of the workload from posting social media posts. And so I set up this workflow he had a huge backlog of professionally shot model photos in Google Drive. So basically, the workflow every day would find a photo in Drive, use some AI to write a description, and then drop it into a table for him to approve, update, or schedule. And then it would post to all of his different social media channels. And yeah, and so from there, I've worked with a few more companies and, always have more coming in the pipeline.
Awesome. I love that it's like, just the vision to kind of see, how you can help other businesses improve that process because I think, for a lot of people automation's scary, right?
Yeah.
And we get told that it's going to replace people's jobs and things like that, but the reality is it's a tool, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that you said that kind of stuck with me when we first talked was you tried to automate your own business enough that you can stay a one-person operation, not because, you didn't want to hire other people, but because you wanted to try to get yourself as efficient as possible before you did that.
Right.
Right. So why was that process so important to you? And at what point are you at where you might consider hiring a second person to help your business grow?
Certainly. Well, first of all, I would, if and when I do hire somebody, I want to make sure that their time is used the most valuable, is the most valuable that it can be.
Hmm.
And so using automation, where we would both be using automation so that we are just exponentially providing value to clients. And so, yeah, for myself, like I had explained, I'd like to stay solo as long as I can using automation, some AI, but there's really so much you can do with just software automation that doesn't involve AI to take care of any of my back office processes. Just because when I do find that candidate for hiring, it would likely be somebody who could take some of the workload off of building automation workflows for clients. Then, yeah, of course, I just want them to be able to focus on the highest leverage activities possible so that we can scale even further. And so just a quick aside, when I'm thinking about my clients and who I want to work with, I definitely don't want to put a client in a position where they feel like they have to fire somebody because of automation that I created. Like, I definitely don't want that. I want them to feel like they have the agency to, let's say I do build out an automation or a series of automations that replace basically a full-time worker's job description. I would very much like my client to have the agency to be able to put that person in a different position or kind of a higher level position where they feel like they're not doing so many manual tasks. And I think in that way they can probably, excel or grow a little bit more in their career if they're able to focus on more strategy
Yeah.
than just, spreadsheets, for example.
Yeah, kind of the AI and the automation at that point becomes almost their direct reports, like they
Hmm.
become more of a manager of these AI or automation flows.
Yes.
And because things break all the time,
Yeah.
and they do require some oversight. Just even if they're working perfectly all the time, just being able to make sure everything's continuing to run smoothly. So, kind of like a practical example, how have you used? What are ways that you've been able to help businesses with their automations? you've been able to help businesses with their automation be able to streamline things, make things more efficient. What are some ways that you've been able to help businesses with their automations? Like what are some practical things that
Sure.
you've been able to do?
Yeah. Well, I would say that my longest term and kind of most engaged client, I won't say the name of them, but they are a sleep technology company. And so two of the biggest things that I've set up for them is one, sort of a lead routing automation. So they get anywhere between maybe 50 to 100 leads contacting them through Typeform every day. And so that all that contact data has to be triaged in some way to the right team member and to the right pipeline inside of HubSpot. So basically, it's kind of evolved over time, but the current form of it starts with a Typeform response, and then it goes through some formatting steps. For example, I am using AI to just double check that email because not a lot of people, but it happens. And when it does happen, then it creates issues. Some people might misspell gmail.com or something if they're typing quickly. So, I've seen some examples that are like Gnail or Gmail with an N. So I do send it through an AI step just so that we can catch those. And then that way the rest of the flow doesn't get completely messed up. So yeah, and then it creates or finds a contact in HubSpot for them, and it creates a deal or it creates a support ticket, kind of depending on which route they went when they were filling out the type form. So the type form itself is kind of a catch-all, and then it has multiple paths depending on the person's needs. So there's that, which has saved them a whole bunch of time, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then I've also, the first project that I started with them that's really evolved over time is orders and quoting for all of their kind of back-end processes. It's nearly seamless where, after that deal is created in HubSpot, once that deal is moved to the quote stage or the purchase order stage, then that kicks off a whole automation that creates a purchase order document or a quote document. It sends emails to their factory, to their accountant, confirmation emails to the new customer, and so on. So it's really, I'd say it's about 95% automated their quoting and ordering process.
Awesome. And I think for anyone listening, I think there's a lot to hear there in the idea that almost everything can be automated if you take the time to figure it out.
Yes.
Right? Or you hire somebody like Alex to figure it out and who can help streamline your business. And I think, just thinking about that, like if you have somebody who's like one of our listeners is stuck and, they're wearing all the hats, they don't feel like they have any margin to breathe, right? They're, they're in the weeds with all these little tasks that seem to eat up their day. Because we all know this as business owners, the admin stuff can sometimes eat up your entire day and you do nothing to move the business forward, right? So knowing all of that, like what's like a first step you'd tell them to take if they're in that position?
Certainly. I would tell them to look at what is the biggest time suck. What are they doing day to day that's taking up the most time? And then what would actually push the needle forward? And if they could automate that one thing that's taking up the most time, how much time could they spend on actually growing their business, like you're saying? Something that's not even, it's adjacent to automation, but it's not even very technical, is just making sure that your email is all organized. So personally, because on average, we spend about 30% of our workday. This I know is just statistics, at least at companies. I'm not sure, not necessarily every entrepreneur, but on average, we do spend about 30% of our workday on email. And the more you can create custom filtering rules to group emails, and also it's just kind of a mental game of making sure that you're not wasting time on email. So when you receive an email, either respond to it or delete it, or label it in some way so that you're just staying organized. And, even without these fancy automation tools, you can find ways to help save yourself some time on some of those big time-consuming tasks throughout the day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I know for me personally, like my email, I'm horrible at managing it. And I do exactly the opposite of what you say. Like I don't clean out my email box. Like it drove my executive assistant crazy probably the
Yeah.
first couple months that we hired after we hired her because I like my inbox is a mess and I don't delete, I don't do anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not that person, right? I need help
Mm-hmm.
with some of that. So
Yeah.
right now it's a person, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there's ways that I could simplify that even more, right? So
Right. Right. And yeah, and I mean, I say that myself, but yeah, I'm definitely guilty. Some days if I'm just not feeling like taking care of my email, then yeah, I will just mark stuff as unread as if I'm going to go back and read it. But typically, if it's from an actual person, one-to-one email, then those are more important. But those marketing emails, I'm on a few different email lists, and usually it's just information, possibly helpful information, but I'm definitely guilty of not clearing out my email as much as I could.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No judgment from this end at all.
Hmm.
If our listeners are curious to learn more about automation to help their business, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they could find me online at automatemy.co. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me just Alex Ward, or my LinkedIn handle is automatemyco.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
yeah, and then even if they're not interested in working with a third party, I definitely recommend just checking out some of the tools out there. There's so many very user-friendly, no-code automation tools like Zapier or ManyChat, like I mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. And if you get a chance to go to Alex's website, automatemy.co, he's got packages of service. He offers coaching opportunities,
Hmm.
and even got case studies on there that you can kind of see some of the work that he's done to help companies, grow and bring automation to their companies to make them better. Definitely check out automatemy.co and check out Alex on LinkedIn. So, Alex, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the conversation today. And I look forward to talking to you again. I know we bonded a lot over podcasts, when we
Yeah.
first talked. So, kind of a love language for both of us. So I appreciate you being here and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, well, thank you to both of you. Thanks for having me.
Take care.